Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I've got a full tank preview for you of the upcoming Tier 10 Italian tank destroyer. This is the Minotauro, and I can tell you if this vehicle goes into the game in an unnerfed state, it will be basically replacing a vehicle that Wargaming are nerfing in the very same patch that they're adding it in, aka the Kranvang. This thing has almost an impenetrable turret, incredible upper hull armor, not even that bad of a lower plate, and even though it looks like it has weak points on top, only one of them is really truly a weak point, which doesn't become it after it's using its gun depression. This thing is an auto-loading monster of a tank, which seems to just have none of the disadvantages that you get from a tank destroyer, with quite a few of the benefits that you'll get from a super heavy vehicle. Now, firstly, I want to add a couple of caveats. I'm kind of late to the party on this. I haven't looked at any other opinions, and I just wanted to try and go in it with a fresh face. And I want to add the additional caveat that I haven't really had enough time with the vehicle. I spent a few hours yesterday playing it, and I do feel that I've got an idea of how it works. And as I've reviewed enough vehicles over the years, I think I might be able to see where this one is going. But please keep in mind, this is version 2 of the test server, and it's very likely that these are going to be the final stats for the tank. But keep up to date with Wargaming's homepage to see if they do make changes. So it's hard to pick tanks to be able to compare the Minotauro to. As it's an autoloader, initially you might think that it's going to be like a Foch B, but it just really doesn't behave like that. This is a super heavy tank, not kind of your glass cannon Foch that really wants to try and burst out the damage. So I think it's fairer to compare it to something like a Badger or a T110E3, both super heavy frontal tanks, with the Badger being the highest damage per minute in the game. Now, it's interesting when we compare the damage per minute that the Minotauro has to the T110E3 and the Badger, and that is because it's significantly worse than the Badger, but better than the T110E3. And considering that it does have an autoloader, and this is a very good autoloader, 5 rounds in the magazine, 24-second reload with 530 damage. However, it does have an 8-second intra-clip reload on this vehicle, so it will take 32 seconds to fire out the entire magazine. This effectively means that you are dealing 2,650 damage over 32 seconds, which will give this vehicle an effective burst damage per minute when it's managed to fully reload of 5,000 while the vehicle is bursting out its magazine. So that actually means that the Minotauro will have better burst damage than a Badger, of course, with the downside that it has to reload for 24 seconds if it wants to be able to sustain that damage. But with the way that engagements are in World of Tanks, if 2,650 damage isn't enough to be able to deal with the target that you need to, more often than not, you will have that 24-second period to be able to reload and go for the next tank. And yeah, 2,650 damage, that's enough to pretty much take out anything apart from a super heavy vehicle that sometimes is health boosting. One of the problems with the Minotauro, however, is that it has one of, if not the worst, penetrations of any of the tier 10 tank destroyers at 255. And when we look at the premium rounds that this vehicle has, they're only 345. While that's better than something like a Foch B, that's still not amazing, and you're not going to be clubbing your way through the front of super heavy armored tanks with guaranteed precision. However, one thing that is nice about this vehicle is because it has that low reload time but long intraclip reload, that you can actually switch out with intuition and change the shells before the engagement, allowing you to possibly use the high explosive rounds on this vehicle that deals 700 damage with 130 millimeters of penetration. That would give this thing 3,500 damage per magazine if you're able to penetrate each of them. Albeit, once again, it is going to take 32 seconds to be able to unload those 5 shells. Shell velocity-wise, the Minotauro is impressive at 1,303. And remember, these are armor-piercing rounds and not APCR rounds, so they're actually going to get extra normalization. So while 255 looks bad, with that kind of shell velocity, it's actually probably more the equivalent of about 270 millimeters of penetration if you include the fact that they're as fast as APCR without actually being APCR, which have less normalization than armor-piercing rounds. Interestingly as well, the high-explosive anti-tank whiz towards the target at 1,256, and the high-explosive rounds as well. So even if you aren't loading AP, you're still going to have great shell velocity that you don't have to give much lead to. So now let's move on to the gun handling of the Minotauro. The aim time is 2.3 seconds. Not great, but not awful. Not great, though, for a gun caliber of this size. The accuracy, though, is horrendous at .44, meaning that on your snipey maps, you probably want to be using an aiming device on this vehicle. You definitely don't want to use a rotation device, because this vehicle actually gets incredible dispersion values when it's turning the turret and when it's turning the tank, but its moving dispersion is 0.2, so you probably want to have smooth ride on your driver to be able to cut that down. But I really don't feel like this vehicle is going to benefit from a rotation device, because remember, the bloom after firing, which is a horrendous 8, doesn't even really matter considering that the intra-clip reload is 8 seconds. So you're not trying to improve the bloom after firing as you are on something like a traditional autoloader with a low intra-clip burst. This vehicle has 10 degrees of gun depression, making it just as flexible on a ridgeline as a Badger, and it has a turret that can turn 45 degrees to the left and 45 degrees to the right, which is the same as the FV215B 183, for example. And just to show you exactly what this looks like, that is a very flexible turret. It just gives the tank that extra traverse speed. Let's say you're aiming in the front and there's a vehicle that's just appeared on your left. Not only can you turn your tank to the left, but you can also turn your turret at the same time, giving you a very effective ability to get your gun on the target quickly. It also means that you don't have those awkward scenarios where you're trying to, aim at something that's in the distance and you have to like turn your tank a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, which blooms out and causes the horrible bloom to stop you from being able to engage them effectively. By having a turret, that also means that you could maybe use binoculars on this vehicle and not deactivate them while you're also tracking targets. Or for any of you filthy Camonet users out there, which I really wouldn't recommend using that, you could also work like that. That's not going to be as good as something like an STRV-103B with that regards, but it's still not bad. Mobility-wise, this is where the Minotauro is actually really scary. It goes forwards at 36 and backwards at 12. This eclipses the T110E3, being 50% faster forwards and backwards than the super heavy American tank destroyer. And it also makes the Badger look sluggish, able to go at 36 both on hard and medium, while the Badger isn't even able to get up to its 30 top speed limit until you start to put things like turbo on the tank on medium terrain. And that is because the vehicle gets really good ground resistances, which hide the vehicle's poor looking power to weight ratio. Wargaming want you to look in the garage to think that the Minotauro is going to be sluggish, but they've decided to make it faster. And when you whack a turbo on the Minotauro, which you can easily afford to do so, albeit sometimes at the cost of accuracy or durability, this thing can go up at 40 kilometers an hour forwards and 15 kilometers an hour backwards. And that's if you're using a standard turbo. If you're putting on a Bounty or a Bond turbo, it's going to be going up towards the 42 mark forwards. That is not a slow tank. And when we take a look at this vehicle's armor, which is 300 at the front of both the hull and the turret, yeah, I think you can see that this thing is not a lightly armored tank that is also able to drive around at 40. It's an absolute terrifying prospect. So let's take a look to see just how good the armor is here on the Minotauro. Okay, so what about if we're firing 255 millimeters of penetration at this tank from the front? And remember, 255 is very healthy. Yeah, this will meet tier 8 and tier 9 tanks. Okay, so you have 0 chance on all of the turret, 0 chance on all of the hull, but we do actually notice that there's a bit of a weak point on top with only 140 millimeters of armor. But I can tell you, being able to hit this thing reliably, it's not the easiest thing you'll ever do in your life, especially with all of this clutter that's around, but maybe the vehicle outlining will help within that regard. The problem is, with this weak point on top, is that as soon as the Minotauro is using even probably half of its gun depression, now you can not really see the weak point on top of the vehicle, making this thing an absolute god tier tank, even if it's using just a small amount of its gun depression. Now, its lower plate, if it's not using any of its gun depression, is 220 millimeters thick, so that pretty much means that most tier 8 vehicles aren't going to be able to pen it more than half the time if they're firing standard rounds, and it's a bit like a Badger where the outside gets better. One of the things that's pretty cool about this vehicle is you can kind of come around the corner with the turret shaped like this, and the whole of the outer plate will still be a struggle for most vehicles to be able to deal with. And you can also kind of side scrape in this tank, although you do have a weak point that starts to expose there. And also, the whole of the under flaps here can be overmatched. So if the vehicle is using its gun depression and it comes over a ridgeline, definitely shoot under here and you'll be able to penetrate it every single time. Also, the belly of the vehicle is weak, so if it does expose that, you can try and take advantage of it. But all in all, frontally, which is where this tank is going to have the mobility to keep most of its targets, this thing is a terrifying prospect. All right, let's imagine you're loading gold rounds, 345 millimeters of heat pen. Doesn't really change, does it, boys and girls? 255 to 340 doesn't really help. Now its lower plate is a little bit weaker, but its upper hull is still monstrous. This is some of the highest penetration in the game on all vehicles apart from tier 10 TDs. All right, why don't we compare the Minotauro to, I don't know, say a Jagdpanzer E100. The Jagdpanzer E100 has the highest penetration in World of Tanks, with very good pen on its standard rounds of 299. Yeah, it can't really pen the front. Although there's something to mention, and that is the roof deck is 55 millimeters. So that means that if you're using either the FV215B183 or the Jagdpanzer E100, you can overmatch that, or artillery shells with AP will overmatch, but that's going to happen to most tanks. So basically, the Minotauro is going to be able to sit in front of a Jagdpanzer, and there's nothing that it's going to be able to do if it's firing regular rounds. Okay, well, what about the highest penetration round in the game? 420 heat. I mean, now you've got kind of like a 70% chance if you hit right to the left or to the right of the gun. If you hit on the outside of the turret, you've got no chance. And actually, the top of the tank kind of becomes a bit of a weak point because it's only got 370 millimeters of effective armor, right? But what happens if the Minotauro now uses its 10 degrees of gun depression sitting in front of a Jagdpanzer E100? Goodness gracious. It has 440 millimeters of effective armor, and you're going to pen the upper hull 1 in 4 times. Wargaming, what are you thinking? This is the highest penetration round in the game. You've gone from creating a Kranvang, which, fair enough, unless it's pointing its gun directly at you, will have some weak points on top, to now having... Actually, no, when it's pointing its gun directly at you, its weak points are visible. It's only when it raises its gun a little bit that they're going to be protected. But this is the highest penetration in World of Tanks. Only one tank has this. Let's, for example, change to a 268, the kind of standard tier 10 tank destroyer for years, and let's see how it performs against it. Okay, what about if it fires gold with 395 pen? It can't really do anything. What about if it's not using any of its gun depression at all? You got like a 70% chance for its upper hull and a 30% on its turret? This is outrageous. Even from the side, this thing is pretty darn decent, even against 300 millimeters of penetration. You are going to be able to take advantage of the side of the vehicle with high explosive anti-tank rounds if you want to spam them there. This thing is going to be an absolute juggernaut. And the problem is that, well, you could argue, oh, well, it's got pretty bad side armor. It's not going to allow you to get that side armor all that frequently. And most tanks in the game have got bad side armor. Even a T110E3 has bad side armor, and no one wants to sit in front of that. This thing feels like an absolute juggernaut of the game. And because it's got so much mobility as well, this is probably the fastest super heavy vehicle in the game outside of something like a Kranvang. But the Kranvang can't expose its upper hull to you like the Minotauro can. Heat rounds are going to be able to take advantage of the Kranvang's upper hull, although it does have a very tall turret. The Minotauro is going to be able to get into a position against you where it's able to shoot most likely your lower plate or most of the upper part of your hull, and you're going to have no chance against it, even if you're a tier 10 tank destroyer. Absolute terrifying prospect. View range wise, the vehicle has 390, which isn't going to be great, but most tier 10 tank destroyers have that, including the other two in this comparison. And the vehicle doesn't have a small amount of hit points at 2,100, which if you use a durability device, you can pump up to a very scary level. I probably said scary quite a few times during this video, and I think that's because this is a tank that's effectively going to replace something like a Kranvang, which Wargaming have taken a year or two and multiple seasons of ruined ranked to be able to address. Anyway, let's see what it does in the gameplay. But just quickly before that, I want to give some recommendations for equipment and for field mods on this tank. So field mods wise, it's pretty simple. You want to take reinforced suspension unless you're a silly sausage. You want to improve the terrible accuracy of the tank. You want to improve the view range of the vehicle. You want to, in my opinion, take the vehicle hit points and the protection to the crew from injuries here, because what's the point of improving the reload time when most of the reload time on this tank is actually the intra-clip reload? This means that you might even be able to drop a med kit on this tank, although I probably wouldn't recommend doing that. I don't think a fire extinguisher would be more useful than a med kit. You could use fuel in some way. And then for the final field mod, it's going to be preference. Either you can improve the engine power and lower the top speed and improve your suspension repair speed, but I feel like because I'm most likely going to be using a durability device on this vehicle, which will help me improve my tracks, I'm actually going to take the reverse speed, which gives me 17 kilometers an hour backwards with a Bounty turbocharger to be able to kite my opponents. Equipment-wise, I'm probably going to end up using Vents, durability, and a turbo on this vehicle, although I would recommend a second build on this tank for more of your sniping maps with an aiming device, because otherwise this vehicle is going to have really poor accuracy and you're not going to be able to make your shots count. But I feel like the Minotauro, at least in my opinion, is meant to be played like a juggernaut in the heavy combat on a ridgeline, which is completely meta gameplay. And I don't really think that you should be sitting at a distance and sniping, although sometimes you end up on Prokhorovka or Malinovka, and it can work out through taking that aiming device to be able to boost it up. Anyway, let's jump into some gameplay. Alright, so here we go, rolling out with the first ever Minotauro gameplay on my YouTube channel. And immediately I want you to get an idea of how fast this vehicle is going to be. Now, keep in mind that I am using a Bounty turbocharger on this vehicle, but I think as the battle pass becomes more and more frequent, more and more people are going to be able to get their hands on Bounty turbochargers, and to be able to put them on tank destroyers really just levels them up massively. And just look at what we're getting along at here. Up to 40 kilometers an hour along the flat there. We're kind of getting into position along with an IS-4. But the IS-4, sure, that's a super heavy tank, but it's not a... If you have a Jagdpanzer E100 and you fire it at an IS-4, you clap it for half of its hit points, pretty much. This tank, to be able to have this unprecedented armor and yet to have this mobility to be able to get into a position, I'm not that far behind the VZ-55s. When I get there, I'm going to have a 2,500 damage magazine. Even more, it's going to be, what, 2,650 damage with the 530 shells. Now, I'm not saying that this vehicle is going to be the complete overpowered god of World of Tanks. Maybe. But it's just looking as if it has all of the statistics to be one of, if not the most meta vehicles, probably in the history of the game. So we see there that the Minotauro on the enemy team exposed too much of their side armor. I'm going to come for my lower plate, and he's going to bounce gold off my side. I'm going to try and fire as many standard rounds of ammunition in this game so you can get an idea of how the vehicle plays with its 255 rather than just spanking heat. And while unfortunately my IS-4 friend did block me there a little bit, it wasn't really him being... it wasn't nefarious in the way that they were trying to block me. It wasn't intentional. So we can't pen the upper plate of the Minotauro there. We have to try and find the lower plate of this vehicle. And you see how quickly this thing is able to turn its turret, but a bit of a weak point there, right on the side. So if it does manage to overturn its turret and it's wanting to engage a vehicle, either on the left or the right, then that might be an opportunity for you. It's so weird to just have Minotauros to the left and to the right of me, and I'm kind of just unable to really deal with them. So in that situation, we penned 2 rounds and we bounced 3 rounds off the Minotauro's armor. But those were regular rounds. The enemy Minotauros have been spamming heat at us, but we still managed to block at least 2 out of the 3. Well, 2 out of the 5 that managed to hit our vehicle. Okay, so it doesn't look like I'm going to really get much done on that flank. So I decided, well, maybe I can go down and harass this Object 430U instead and try and help out this Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. And this is where this thing is just crazy. I'm going down slope at 49 here, able to go and get towards this 430U. And what is he ever going to do in this situation? He's getting chased. And sure, this intra-clip reload almost makes it feel like it doesn't have an autoloader. But I can tell you, after you play this vehicle for a while, it kind of just feels as if you're a Badger driving around. Sure, you don't have quite as good of a rate of fire as the Badger. You can get the Badger's rate of fire down to about 6 seconds, I believe. But having 530 damage instead of having 480 like on the Badger is an advantage in itself. And to have the turret, and to have the better armor, and to have the better mobility than the Badger, the only real place this tank kind of sucks is going to be the accuracy of the vehicle. But unlike the Badger, where you have to use a gun rammer to be able to achieve not quite as good damage per minute burst-wise than the Minotauro can manage to achieve, this vehicle doesn't have to use a gun rammer, so it can end up using either an accuracy device to be able to improve its accuracy if it wants to, or what I'm probably going to do with the vehicle is I'm going to end up using a durability device to make me pretty much untrackable and to have a 2,400 hit point vehicle. Now, The real issue that all of this brings is that this is not a heavy tank. Alright, if it was a heavy tank and it got matched up against heavies, I think it would probably be okay. The real problem that this vehicle has is that it's going to get matched up against tank destroyers, and it's just so different to all of the other tank destroyers in the game. We stayed cool there to be able to get that lower plate of that Minotauro, and while we're down to 350 hit points, we're still in it to win it. I wanted this to be my concluding comment on the Minotauro. Having a tank destroyer that blurs the lines between heavy tank and tank destroyer is an incredibly dangerous prospect. If any of you remember many years ago in World of Tanks, when tank destroyers didn't get matched up against tank destroyers and heavy tanks didn't get matched up against heavy tanks, it was all random. Sometimes you would go into a game where there were 10 tank destroyers versus 10 heavy tanks. Let me know in the comments if you think who would actually be winning the majority of those battles. And I can tell you, at least from my side, it definitely wasn't the tank destroyers. Heavy tanks are more flexible, heavy tanks are more meta, they're able to synergize better. And apart from on maps like maybe Prokhorovka, or if you end up on something like Malinovka, the heavy tanks are just going to win the vast majority of the battles. There's a reason why in Clan Wars that you don't see... wanted to almost say thank you to that Panzer 7 for bumping into me, but at least I held back my kind of like passive thanks, and I guess I did it into the VZ55 now, so maybe I need to point the finger at myself. There's a reason in Clan Wars that apart from on certain maps where you take things like T110E3s, or you can maybe take some other tank destroyers as well. Let me know in the comments what kind of tank destroyers are in the meta for Clan Wars at the moment, because I'm really interested. I haven't been keeping up on Clan Wars as much as possible. And also let me know if it's a case that really people are picking things like heavy tanks and medium tanks to go along with light tanks, with maybe one light tank or two light tanks for vision. But even then, with regards to light tanks for vision, Wargaming are already getting the game into a position where you've got vehicles like CS63s, which are also competing with light tanks for their roles, at least from a competitive standpoint. And this tank is going to blur the lines so much between a heavy tank and a tank destroyer that my prediction, and I could be wrong, I'll be interested to see if I am going to be wrong, is that this thing is going to get the most outrageous win ratio, and Wargaming, if they don't nerf it before it goes to the live server, will have to nerf it within about 6 months. This thing is terrifying. Alright, so let's see how the vehicle will perform on a map like Prokhorovka. Now, unfortunately, the test server was bugged for me, so I couldn't actually be able to assign a full set of equipment. Hopefully that's something that Wargaming's going to be able to iron out. I think Twitch chat at the time was telling me that if you close the game and you open the game, that it actually ends up with you being allowed to set up a second set of equipment. But in this kind of a situation, I definitely would have dropped the durability device and then used an accuracy device. However, just so you know how the vehicle performs, this is going to be me without an accuracy device, using a durability device and using a turbo. So this tank just hits. It's way more than something like a Foch. Of course, you have that big intra-clip reload, but we'll have to take a look at the post-game stats to see whether we manage to hit that Leopard twice. Or keep your eye out for when they reappear, and if they're less than half hit points, then they're going to have had a bad day with that. It's really hard to explain just how flexible this thing is with its turret. Another tank destroyer might have to overexpose its side armor to the left, but to have this 45 degrees, it's just absolutely wonderful. And it doesn't allow you to turn the tank too much that you kind of end up overexposing your side armor to the vehicles as well. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that it's a good thing, and I would actually prefer if I could do a full turret to reverse turn on this vehicle. But hopefully you all are trying to... I'm just trying to paint a picture of the vehicle. That's all I can do really with my tank previews. And it doesn't look like that terrible accuracy is kind of holding me off here. And do you know why? It's because the shell velocity. Having this incredible 1,303 meters a second shell velocity means that it doesn't matter so much that your accuracy is poor. When you have to give lead against a target, accuracy becomes much more of a problem because you can't give lead perfectly against a vehicle like the EBR. You just have to go with your gut instincts as to where it's going to be. You don't aim at where the... Did that one go through the turret? Rewind the YouTube video and take a look. Now, I think it probably went just over the hull and towards the right. Almost feel like rewinding to go and have a look to see whether that one went, but it doesn't matter because we hit the next one. just to keep in, just to let you know, this was my second game playing World of Tanks in 2 weeks. I hadn't played World of Tanks at all. This was me coming back from Mexico and playing. So it looks like, well, I'm trying to suggest that maybe going away for 2 weeks wasn't too bad for my aim, at least with regards to hitting that EBR. But I'm sure that it's probably just down to luck that we managed to hit those shells. What I'm also want to highlight here is that the intra-clip reload, while it definitely means this vehicle doesn't feel like an auto-loader, it doesn't really hamper the tank all that much. Sure, this downtime is annoying, because if I was playing a Badger, maybe I could get a shot into that 277 now, but it doesn't feel like it cripples the tank. I think to be able to balance this vehicle, either the reload of the vehicle needs to be more punishing, so it has downtime to make the vehicle feel more pressured with its shots, or it needs to just have a weak point on top, probably needs to be a little bit slower, and I think its upper hull needs to be a little bit weaker as well. With the way that the vehicle is, it just, well, the way that it currently is, because of course everything is subject to change. Maybe we find out in a couple of days when Wargaming release iterations of the test server they are going to make some changes. It just feels as if it doesn't have enough weaknesses. It feels as if it's got its hands in all of the cookie jars and it's eating up all of them. It's like some greedy fat pigeon. Nom 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 nom. Do pigeons eat cookies? Probably would if they had the chance. Pigeons don't have hands though. Wings in cookie jars? Possibly, maybe. Maybe it would just ram the cookie jar, knock it over, and then be able to I digress. Sorry, my mind, it's a little bit active sometimes. What I'm trying to suggest is that the Minotauro is statistically too good in too many areas. When you give a tank an autoloader, it has to be worse in other ways. Wargaming, I think, have really tried to balance this vehicle by giving it a horrendous intra-clip. But all that really happens is it's a Badger that has the burst damage of a Badger, that has better armor than the Badger, that has better mobility than the Badger, that has a semi-traversable turret, that has a bit of downtime where it has to actually reload. And the accuracy with the shell velocity, as I said, doesn't seem to even really hamper the vehicle all that much. Really just got to play this thing to feel it. And if Wargaming don't change it, I do expect we're going to see a lot of these in the matchmaker very, very soon. You know, the sweaty nerds like me, we've got all the free experience, we've got all the blueprints to be able to race up the tech tree. And also, if any of you haven't decided what national fragments to take from this season's battle pass and you haven't already selected your rewards, take Italians. If you take the Italian fragments, then you're going to be able to skip maybe one of the vehicles if you really absolutely utterly want to experience the Minotauro as quickly as possible. Now, the way up towards the Minotauro is not even really that bad. You're not going to have a terrible time. Looks like I didn't hit that leopard earlier, by the way, as he's still on half hit points. So the damage that you see, the 3,000 that I've dealt, is the damage that we're going to have. Or was that an ammo rack, or was that somebody on my team hitting them? It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, I guess. And I've just never felt so safe just rushing in here. I mean, I guess I could get F-feed, but when you've got this kind of mobility, I am speeding up the replay there a little bit. Don't think that this thing is like an EBR. This is one-time speed. Sorry for speeding up the replay there. This thing is fast, and to have this kind of assault armor as well as being able to go at 40, it just seems outrageous. I think I made a bit of a misplay here. Possibly could have been able to get a reload in, but oh well, I'll get one shot, get a bit of spotting. 50p will ram. I'll get a ram kill while I'm reloading on the vehicle as well. And just like that, we managed to get ourselves 7,200 or 300 combined, something along those lines. And I guess that was it, excluding the blind fire, maybe the damaged blind fire that we put in towards the leopard. So what happens if you get nearly 8,000 combined in the Contracaro Minotauro with 5 kills and 1,085 base experience? You get a second class, apparently. So that's not even in the... There have been 1 in 5 players who've had better games than that on the test server in this vehicle, and it really doesn't surprise me. Now I want to show you how the Minotauro handles pressure. And yeah, when you're a content creator, sometimes you have players like this who want to maybe come and have a little bit of fun. Well, maybe he just wants to ram in his Object 268 version 4. And to be fair, he did do 855 against the FE405 there. I'm saying this because I believe this player was in my previous game, but you know what, I'm not going to complain. If you want to feed me 1,184 hit points at the beginning of this battle, that's alright. So this is why I take the reverse speed on the Minotauro here. This thing just can back its way out of issues. If I was in a T110E3 right now, I would be sweating bullets to be able to try and get back into safety. This thing just has all of the flexibility. It's like a heavy tank with regards to the turret. It's almost like a heavy tank or a medium tank, not a super heavy vehicle with regards to its reverse speed. You know how a mouse feels when you're going backwards? Definitely not slow, right? That's kind of how the Minotauro feels. But imagine if a mouse could also go at 40 forwards. That would be an absolute terrifying prospect. Something that I've said probably about, you should do a counter. How many times have I said terrifying prospect in this video? My alarm bells are ringing. I'm not sure if yours are with the way that this thing statistically looks. The problem with a vehicle like this is that if anyone remembers how long it took Wargaming to nerf the Object 268 version 4, I think we might be in for a little bit of a rough time over the next few months with a lot of players playing this thing. So everyone's spamming gold at me, and I'm just casually reversing from 4 players. And what I want to highlight is that the intro clip doesn't even really feel like it's all that punishing. I asked the Minotauro behind me for a little bit of help. I realize there's an EBR on my side, but he's not the one who's loading right now. In this kind of a situation, I think I probably should have unloaded on the EBR behind me. But oh well, I'm just going to let the VZ shoot me in the butt. I can tank him, and as long as I manage to finish off the Leopard, I should be okay. Somehow the VZ, I believe, missed one of the shots. I've bounced 2,300 damage so far this game, and now that I know that VZ is reloading, he's not really my concern. I asked the Minotauro for help again, and it looks like he is helping me. The VZ, I guess, thinks that, the FP405 is going to be able to finish off their Minotauro. And while my reload will be a little bit longer than the VZ55, and he's going to be firing off his shots, unfortunately, the artillery manages to finish him off. Looks like I can be able to go after that VZ55. Kind of worried about this FP405, although, come on, get the gun round, get the gun round. Q. Nice shot there by the FP405. Finished me off, but luckily, they're dead too. So, what I wanted to show here was 4,700 damage in 4 minutes, less than 4 minutes, and that's including the drive that we had to make up the slope. How scary does this thing look that it can handle pressure from mostly gold rounds, apart from the AP round from the FP405, which was actually a good round to use against this vehicle. We handled all of that pressure. The intraclip reload didn't really feel like it was too bad. I felt like I had the DPM of the Badger. Sure, I had that downtime afterwards, which was a little bit awkward. This thing is the all-purpose daddy tank. And again, I am terrified that Wargaming are not going to nerf this tank a little bit before it goes into the game. And this thing will be munching up tier 10 vehicles, let alone tier 9 and tier 8, come its release in update 118. So Wargaming, a final message directly to you. I don't usually like to question your balancing of the game because it's your job. You've got lots of super testers, which are now on the EU server. You've got lots of very experienced developers who know what they are doing. This one, if I might be so bold, it does feel like a little bit of a miss. And after the VZ55 got those final buffs, I guess, to make it exciting. And what is the result of the VZ55 buffs? The result of the VZ55 buffs is that at least over the last 60 days at tier 10, it has, if we take a look at the heavy tanks, the best win ratio of any of the heavies in the game still to this day. And the Kranvang, as it's going to be nerfed, the VZ's just going to stay on top. I wouldn't usually like to be too cynical about the way that Wargaming sometimes balances their games. But I have a feeling with a vehicle like this, that Wargaming might be trying to put it into the game in an incredibly good fashion to bring players to trying to get it as quickly as possible before possibly it might be inevitably nerfed. And when I consider the disparity between Wargaming's balancing department, how awful the M5Y is, it's such an unfun tank, and it's near the bottom of the list with regards to how competitive the vehicle is. And then we compare it to their VZ55 release that was at the top of the list, and now the Minotauro that I think is also going to be able to be at the top of the list with regards to how competitive it is and obnoxiously destructive at the top of the list. I'm very concerned for the balancing of this one, and I would implore Wargaming to if it's too late on the test server, please actively monitor the Minotauro and maybe even put a caveat out to the player base to say that you know, things have been pretty tough with the political events that have been going on. Maybe we haven't had quite enough time to do our quality assurance tests with the Minotauro, and keep in mind that we will be reacting to the situation. And Wargaming, what I would suggest is that as soon as you get those initial statistics and you start to actually see how it's performing on the live server, adjust it. And don't take 6 months. Don't take a year, because this one could be truly damaging for the game. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for my tank preview. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. Do you think that I'm overly anxious about the Minotauro and it's not actually going to be very good? Or do you think that it looks like it could be an absolute behemoth of the battlefield? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.